Okay, hello, welcome to KITV, going live right now. Okay, welcome to KITV, going live right now. This is a brand new radio station. I'm your host. Sorry for the amateur hour. This is an amateur hour standard zone. I'm now broadcasting a brand new radio station. You probably have heard this is an early setup. I'm jumping in early so that people can get an idea, that's right, of exactly what it is that I'm attempting to do. I'm broadcasting a brand new radio station. This is a news radio station, and it's a sport-free zone. To start with, let me introduce myself. My name is David C. I'm an amateur at this. This is the first time I've done this, so if you come across as being an amateur and I come across as being nervous, well, I am. I've never done broadcasting in my entire life, so this is going to be the first time I've ever done this. The theme of the show is going to be news, and I hope that it will be informative. I have some articles to read, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you this show. I've been doing some digging around. I'm a Bible believer, and I have been a Bible believer since 1984, and I found out that I've been looking at some pretty weird stuff since I've been a Bible believer. So let's get on and let's get cracking. I have a fairly good show with you today. I hope for a show that this will be a really good show, and I'm hoping that people will be interested in the show, and above all, I'm hoping that people will find it informative. I will start usually the show. I'd like to start in the format, and by the way, I'm beta testing this show, so this show is in the beta testing stage. That means I'm going to work out the glitches as I go along, and work out the content, the formula, the format, and try to perfect. I've got some ideas for later on, as and when I can obtain the necessary software. But here we are. Okay, the first news. Let's get on with it. I've got some news getting through, and then I'm going to get into some subjects which I like. Okay, right, first item on the agenda. I have an article here from Ireland. This is posted by the journal IE. Rents are getting so high that there's little chance of saving for a house. Well, this sounds to be a common problem. It's a common problem because everywhere we're going, we're seeing, as the gentrification of areas occur, those who are not necessarily in the same sort of price bracket or looking for a slot in mainstream society, they are being squeezed out of the picture. And the reason why they're being squeezed out of the picture, and this is an important thing to get, because of market forces which are driven by human desire. Everybody wants to live in a nice place. Nobody wants the bogeyman roaming the streets. Nobody wants the nasty person knocking at their door, and everybody likes in the back of their mind, in the subconscious, the nice little picket fence, nice safe garden. Everybody wants that, and it's natural to want that. And I give honour to those people who seek that. But it comes with a price, and the market forces that are driving that price are the desire to pay for that kind of lifestyle. Now, in the early days, way before Margaret Thatcher's era, it used to be the bog standard mortgage to rent to wages ratio used to be a third of your annual wages used to be used for paying either rent or mortgage. When Margaret Thatcher came on board, and I got my fingers burnt by Margaret Thatcher, and I'll tell you the reason why. Margaret Thatcher She went for the second term of office. I believe it was a second term of office. I may be corrected. Somebody may correct me on this, but I think it was a second term of office. And what she did is she never announced to Londoners what she had intended to do with the GLC, because she was quite pally at the time with Ronald Reagan, who, by the way, was also driving the initiative with what was going on in Wall Street, with the changes of how economy works, with the changes of how goods and services are shipped across the globe. This is all part and parcel of laying the groundwork to why this kind of thing is happening. Okay? Excuse me for... I have a bit of a tickly nose. This is all driving the agenda forward, because the mainstream economy was that we wanted to have our goods shipped off offshore, or to cheap countries that could produce our goods cheaply. At the same time as we wanted luxury goods in, at the same time as we wanted to liberate the market from the state-sanctioned checks and balances. Now, a proper Hegelian dialectic country, I guess, would be a country that has one half capitalist, one half socialist, and the unions in the socialist camp act as a counterfoil to the capitalists who want to advance the economy. Now, if that's a perfect balance, because there's no such thing as a perfect economy, none at all. If that's a perfect balance that we can get, as near perfect as we can get, it means then there is some way of restraining greed at the same time as restraining civil unrest. The problem is that the revolution, the counterculture revolution, which by the way started much further back, it started way back in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, was all coming to a boiling point at the late 70s and early 80s, with civil unrest in this country, with the unions, the Yorkshire miners' strikes, and there was a massive upheaval for what was going on with the economy. And of course, as Margaret Thatcher was friendly with Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan's economic initiatives were starting to kick in Wall Street and in Washington, Margaret Thatcher decided, well, I'll have a slice of that action. I'll introduce the idea and the notion that there's a free economy. Okay? That there's a free economy happening in the world, and I want to slice it in. I want to introduce that to England. The idea of a free economy is a free economy where there's very few checks and balances. Okay? Very few checks and balances. And those checks and balances... Hold on. Just shutting off my news articles. Those checks and balances are regulations which usually would have been enforced by government and enforced by unions with executives controlling it, were totally released, and that meant that the bankers could come in, that meant that the mortgage lenders could come in, that meant the money changers. That's what it is, the money changers. This was an opportunity for an economy to have unfettered, uncontrolled money changing activity happening in this country. But this was going on across the board. Okay? And ever since Margaret Thatcher, now I'll tell you how I got my fingers burnt with Margaret Thatcher. It was on her I believe her second term of office that she was campaigning for. She had intended to abolish the GLC, but she never told us in London that's what she intended to do. Now, and with the abolition of the GLC brought about the end of the fair's fair policy on the tube, and also the abolition of the fair rents officers, or at least a heavy control on the fair rents officers and how they could cap rents in the public sector, that being the council sector, and that being those who are renting property who would like to have that property rent capped by a fair rents officer. Now, the upshot of this was that suddenly property prices started to slowly rise. Now, when you have property prices starting to rise, but the level of wages is not risen in line with inflation, and inflation starts to increase as money starts to be produced, because that's what happens when you print more money without there being the gold standard to levy it against. You get inflation. Okay? And this inflation has now caused a situation which is becoming in some people's cases, quite unbearable. Now, I feel sorry for the people in Ireland. I also feel sorry for those people who would like to buy their own property, and that's a pipe dream for the wages that they're on. But nevertheless, that's exactly what is happening in Ireland. But it's been happening across the globe, this issue, and this issue is quite a disturbing issue. My take on it is it's very difficult because I like most people, I would like to have private accommodation. I'd like to have my own house. But the problem is that when you desire that, you do eventually end up reflecting a desire and to live a better life, and that drives the prices up. That's what the gentrification has been all about. The gentrification is essentially the wealthy middle class coming in, who have the buying capital and the administrative wherewithal to make it work, and then they ghettoize the underprivileged and the less fortunate, and they become disenfranchised and disaffected by the system. Make no bones about it, it's happening. It's a very sad fact. Nonetheless, that's an article from Ireland. Okay. The next article I'm going to share is Hundreds March in Anti-IKRRA to condemn the slaughter at a peace rally. Now this is happening in Turkey. Now I'm kind of intrigued by this one. And the reason why I'm intrigued by this one, because as a Bible believer, there's a biblical prerequisite of one of the coming of the Messiah is you shall beat your swords into plowshares. We may be seeing the possibility as people now protest against violence, are people saying, are we or have we had enough of violence? Well, for those people who are intelligent enough and intellectual enough and emotionally moral enough, and those who are biblically minded enough, and for those people who have a morality that is, well, to say the least, accepting that human beings have a right to live and we should not be dealing with them in a very nasty way, I think that this spells the volume of what's going on here. And I think that what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to start asking that question. Do we need war? Now, who is behind war? Now, war is a means, and we're going to connect this to a later article I have dealing with Noam Chomsky, because we're going to get into Noam Chomsky and a few items of how things work in the real world with regards to media and the government. But who wants war? Well, generally speaking, the only people who want war are those people who have a vested interest and a controlling interest in the arms industry and the media industry, because the media and the arms industry have to work hand in hand for war to be sold to the public. Do you understand? In order for war to be sold to the public, the military have to be in hand with the media, and the media have to be in hand with the military. If they're not, then we have a system whereby the military control and the media aren't reporting they're being lazy or they're frightened of the military. I don't know whether that's the case. It could be. But for me, from what I've understood of Noam Chomsky, the military and the media have to be in bed with each other somewhere. Okay? Now, most ordinary people who are willing to accept that they're looking for peace and prosperity on this planet, they will be willing to be looking at finding solutions that the military and the media cannot provide. So I'm going to read a few articles of this. I'll read a few tacks from this page. Excuse my spelling. As I said, I'm not used to this. This is amateur hour, so you might find me. And by the way, I'm taking my glasses off and on because I need to read with these and see the camera with the other ones. So that's going to be something that you might find a little disquieting. You'll have to forgive me and permit me to trespass upon your patience a little bit on that one. Well, this is the article. It's written by, and this was posted by the Associated Press of today, the 12th of 10th, 2015, Hundreds march in Ankara to condemn the slaughter at a peace rally. Ankara, Turkey, hundreds of people marched throughout Istanbul and the Turkish capital and Ankara on Monday to condemn the slaughter by suicide bombers at the weekend's peace rally, with many venting their anger at the Turkish government itself. Some demonstrations chanted the killer state will be held accountable. Now this is interesting, you see. People are chanting the killer state will be held accountable, okay, and people are venting their anger. Now it's possible, it's very possible that this that the slaughter at this peace rally took place as a direct result of agents provocateurs being sent in to agitate the rally and to essentially to break its reputation, to break the trust that people have in such processes of peace, to protest against a war campaign. That's what agents provocateurs do. They're usually sent in to destroy the reputation of such marches. The Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, I hope that's how you pronounce it, however, rejected accusations by opponents that the government was to blame for the nearly simultaneous attacks Saturday, calling them dangerous and dastardly. That's an interesting name, dastardly. I haven't heard that in quite some time. He also denied that they were the result of Turkey's involvement in the war in Syria. Now, it's also interesting as well that I've always found that in the as a student of the Bible, when we look at some ancient cultures that have some sites of antiquity, normally what happens is that there tends to be people who do not want such sites of antiquity to be made known. And one of the best ways to make sure that people don't go to those places is actually to create a war. But also remember that the gold, oil and drugs scenario kicks into play with the Middle East, because the Middle East right now, and my goodness, the Middle East is all up in arms. There is so much happening in the Middle East. It is really frightening how much is going on, what's really happening, and above all, oh my goodness, how do we begin with such a case with Syria? We've got ISIL, Islamic State, whatever you want to call it, proven or unproven to be a project of the US government. Well, we know that Damascus, in the scriptures, the Bible says that Damascus is going to be leveled to the ground. It will become a ruinous heap, and maybe this is the process by which this is going to happen. It's one of the key marks that people in biblical scholars, in biblical circles, are looking for. But it is such a thing. And of course, obviously, Syria is just north of Israel. It's right on the other side of the Golan Heights border. You have Syria and Lebanon. And there's been several skirmishes on behalf of Islamic extremists trying to break into the northern Israel border, and IDF guys having to work hard at defending themselves there, as well as down in Gaza. And I think right now it looks like there's a lot of things that are happening centered around Israel. It doesn't make it look good at the moment. I'm trying to be objective about it, but in reality, Israel is a nation the size of Wales, and it has got every single country that is surrounded it are Islamic countries. And the majority, if not all, the leaders of the Islamic countries, including the Islamic terrorist groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Authority, formerly known as the Palestinian Liberation Organization. You know, it's a major interest as an adjunct, to get off on a tangent a bit. It's amazing that they awarded, when he was alive, Yasser Arafat the Nobel Peace Prize. And how much blood did he have on his hands? I don't get that. I don't get that. Anybody can get that one? Can anybody understand that one? Does anybody see that pattern of that habitual pattern and serial pattern of abuse that these guys, and how many people who have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize have got blood on their hands? How can you say that that's working towards peace? Well, I have to say that there is obviously a case that's that needs to be looked into. And of course, obviously, I'm now looking at some comments. People are now posting some comments. I don't know how wild this is going to be. I don't know if those comments are for me. But anyway, everybody has a right to a peace. Everybody has right to live in peace. But unfortunately, when you have people who consciously are aware that their politicians are lying to them, but subconsciously act like their politicians are whiter than snow, then human beings have got a dichotomy with that one. Really, they have. I don't understand how that's at all possible that anybody could walk down the street and say, excuse me, oh yeah, do you ask a person in the street, ask a person, do you think politicians lied to you? Yeah, they'll say to you, but how comes you trust them enough to vote for them? Well, we'll pass on that one. And of course, obviously, we are saddled with a system that we have inherited for far too long, in my estimation. And that is obviously something that is changing. But hopefully, we always ask, hopefully, that people will start to beat their swords into plowshares. But I wonder what it will take. What will it take for the human beings? I remember Stan Deyo. He made a remark. He described a hypothetical situation where a brother and sister are in their bedroom fighting over a toy, and they're at each other's throats. And then there's a knock on the door, and it's a dad with his belt. And they know full well that when the dad's knocking on the door, he's got his belt. They know that they may have to behave themselves, but they're still fighting. But when the knock on the door finishes and the door opens and there's their dad with a belt, they know that they've now got to behave themselves and they've got to be peaceful. They've got to work. Well, I'm going to say this, that for those people who might not believe in God, might not believe in Yeshua, might not believe in Yahweh, He is our Heavenly Father, and He sees us behaving in ways that are just simply inappropriate. And unfortunately, we are like children. We are like children in many regards. We rant and rave. We want our own personal version of events. We want to go off and do whatever we want to do, and oh my goodness, and then we learn from our own mistakes. And sometimes some of our mistakes have been quite catastrophic and quite cataclysmic. Here's some of the mistakes we have in history. We have the World War I, World War II, the Inquisitions, the Crusades, the wars. This planet has been a restless planet, and at least for immediate practical purposes, the last 2,000 years has definitely been nothing but the tribulation and the difficulty. We have gone from one major calamity and crisis to another. But at least people are trying, We hope that people will try. I try to put a positive spin on it because I know full well that look, we do live in a very difficult world. Anyway, that's an article from Turkey. By the way, I'll be posting these articles on online via YouTube. They'll be in the sections underneath the video. This video will be uploaded to YouTube, and of course, obviously, it is going to be shared via Facebook. And I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Okay, now the next article. Caroline Lucas. This is from The Guardian today. Caroline Lucas, government must act on sexist marriage certificates. Now, this is an interesting one. I'll read just an interesting article. The government is being urged to address the continuing blatant sexism of marriage certificates, which currently ask for the profession of the father of the bride and groom, but not that of the mother. I don't know where these people get these ideas from. Pushed by campaigners last year, the Prime Minister promised he would address the issue, which he acknowledged did not reflect the modern Britain. What does reflect modern Britain? What does? we have those people, maybe a small percentage of the people who are the upper class. Most of them, unless they're lefty trendies, tend to go for the bog standard package. The children, well, usually it's the family with 0.5 kids. Okay, that's what they normally put it, is the family with 0.5 kids. But modern Britain is more than just simply whether or not you have diversification of kinds or marriage forms in infinite varieties. Okay, you get marriage forms and family forms in infinite varieties today. And being as it is that I'm a believer in the Bible, I would have to say that that's something I would not do. It's something which I would not do. What reflects modern Britain? Well, I'm here to say that in Britain, actually at the current moment, the social position in Britain is that the values are being eroded away by a war of attrition by various quarters of our society who are essentially trying to subvert our country. I'm a great watcher of one of my favourite media jocks, alternative media jocks from the UK, a man called Richard D. Hall, and he's done one on media subversion, and I can see quite clearly that that's exactly what's happening. The values of a society are being altered to the point where actually it's becoming almost impossible to see what is moral and what isn't moral. And of course, obviously, the games are being played in all kinds of unique ways. And this is just yet again another article that indicates that that there are all sorts of gameplays going on. Okay. Now we have another one. This one is from The Guardian. US government deporting Central American immigrants to their deaths. I'd like to talk about this one a little bit. This is the Guardian, the top lead sentence on this one. The Guardian investigating into the consequences of Obama's immigration crackdown reveals the US deportees have been murdered shortly after returning to El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, with a study saying as many as 83 killed since 2014. The big problem about Guatemala, Honduras is that I believe that they're on the trade route between Venezuela and Colombia. And that's part of the trade route that goes from Venezuela, Colombia, or Colombia, Venezuela, up through the Central and South America's column of Panama, Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador are known hotspots for drug activity, and it's also this also reflects upon what's happening in America with the immigration situation in general, because there is an operation that's been going right now and has been going for quite some time, and the operation is called Fast and Furious. The idea is that the US government wanted to try to crack down on the cartels operating out of Mexico. Unfortunately, there was a major backlash, and that is that the weapons they sent south that were intended for the police, to help the police with their dealings with the cartels, ended up getting in the wrong hands. And being in the wrong hands means, well, trouble. And the whole immigration issue is also up for a lot of debate here, because it's been used in some way. I get the feeling a lot of people out there in the world are getting the feeling that the immigration issue is being used primarily to break the back of quite a few countries. Yes, there are people, and yet again it's quite similar to the story we have with Ireland. People want a better life, but when you want a better life, it drives the prices up. People are moving from despotic countries into countries where there is a better life to be had, but at the same time they are bringing with them their ideas, their philosophies, their belief systems, their values. The questions are the values of the that they're bringing are the values that we hold dear to ourselves? Now we have, this country claims, rightly or wrongly, I'm open to debate on that one, but rightly or wrongly, this country claims to have based its life on Christian values, and part of those Christian values are being forgiveness and tolerance. But how on earth can you say that it's tolerant to have indigenous people misbehaving, which is a hypocrisy upon immigrants misbehaving in a country that is being torn apart by issues that actually are smokescreening the real issue, and that is, who are the real culprits behind what's happening with the world? Okay, who are the real culprits? And the US has always pursued a very aggressive foreign policy, and most people know this. Most people are aware of this. And yet again, there's an expression they have in Washington. Now, for those people who watch an awful lot of what I call Tom Clancy based novels made into films, there is an expression in Washington DC. It's called the hawks and the doves. The hawks are those people who seek peace, and the hawks are those people who seek war, and the doves are those people who seek peace. The hawks and the doves. Well, I heard once in a movie the expression, it's the time for the hawks and the doves to come together. It's come to Jesus time. Now, when they say come to Jesus time, this is an expression that most people are unaware of. I'm going to introduce you to the term when they say in military films, US intelligence films like Clear and Present Danger, Patriot Games, and when they write it in books, it's come to Jesus time. That's not the Jesus of the Bible they're talking about. They're actually talking about one of the co-founders of the CIA, James Angleton Jesus, Jesuit-trained philosopher for the CIA. And that's who they're talking about. It's come to Jesus time. They're talking about James Angleton Jesus. You can go and check up his name, and you can see that's exactly what they mean. So what we have here is a situation where people are being played for in a game, and I'm pretty sure this is going to get me shot one day, so that's okay. I'm only a small person, but this is what they're doing. This is so the immigration issue, the property issue. These are all but mere indicators, key indicator species. And by the way, to get back to the Irish one, the Irish article about the property prices, I believe that oil and property are key indicator species with regards to the economy, the health of the economy, how well the oil is doing, how well the automobile industry is doing, and how well the property business is doing. Okay, now I'm going to get on from another story. This is a story posted up from I-24, which is a very small call it Jewish Israeli media. I had an opportunity to visit that facility last year. It's a beautiful radio station, beautiful TV station, fantastically done. And they have 3 circular studios in there, and they produce different reports throughout the day. I believe they're a 24-hour news outlet. And anyway, this is a live one. Now, I've got this article here. The reason why I'm reporting this article is because I want to report what's happening in the Middle East as well. I really do. And I'll read this. Okay. Live blog, Jerusalem. This is from I-24. Israeli teen critically injured in the 3rd stabbing attack of the day. What has been happening in Israel is absolutely unprecedented, and it is not being recorded and reported by anybody in the mainstream media. You might find it might be reported late at night when most people go to sleep, when they can slip it in. A 16-year-old Israeli teen is in critical condition after being stabbed on a bus in the Pesach Zev neighborhood in Jerusalem. A 20-year-old woman was also seriously injured in the attack. According to reports, 2 terrorists were involved in the attack, and at least one of the attackers was shot and killed. I'm going to share with you, if anybody watches I-24 or anybody goes to Jerusalem Jane YouTube video, or anybody who's following the weekly briefings by Mickey Rosenfeld, the chief inspector and public relations person for the Israeli police, what is happening in Israel in this last weekend? There has been a stabbing on one day, stabbing on another day. There's been attempted terrorist attack. There's been attempted a suicide bomber where a woman drove her car loaded with explosive, intending to take it right down into the heart of the old city, but the car blew up, and I'm not too sure what's actually happened to her. But there's also been unrest in all kinds of places. Some of the people who live in the West Bank area, the Palestinian area of the West Bank, have been attempting to break the big wall that the Israelis have erected, and they erected that wall, by the way, specifically to stop and eliminate suicide bombers coming in from the West Bank into Israel. Okay? This is why they erected it. They didn't erect it to make life difficult for the Palestinians per se. They erected it to make it difficult for suicide bombers coming into Israel. Now, some people would like to say that that Israel's an apartheid nation. Well, it's interesting that if you wanted to know about any apartheid nation, how about having an apartheid nation of the size of, say, Russia, China, America, any of the big giants out there in nation states? They have conducted a policy whereby their foreign policy has taken them to war in all kinds of places, which in some cases would be classed as illegal wars, but they've managed to find ways of sanctioning that. We'll get into that in much later on. I'll be connecting some articles on that one. But what we have is a situation. It's quite critical now in Israel. Okay, it's quite critical, because if they're going to be doing the kind of attacks, if these young Muslim boys, and these are young Muslim boys. Now I'm going to talk about the difference between a terrorist attack of old school, which takes organisation and planning, and a terrorist attack of modern school, which doesn't take much planning, much implementation, and much organisation. Most of the terrorist attacks that are happening recently in Jerusalem have been opportunist events that have been sparked by the fear and hatred of Israel, driven by essentially by the leaders in their communities, who are driving the agenda with these young boys, with the idea of sparking and stirring their deeds up to blood so that they can go out and do whatever they want by grabbing a knife from a shop and going out and having a pop. Old styles terrorist attack took planning. The idea is you would get the equipment together, you would assemble it in some places, you would then okay the route, the okay would be vetted by the chain of command, and then you'd go out and do it. That takes organisation. Now that is why that wall in the West Bank was erected, to prevent that kind of activity going on. But what we have today now is more of an opportunist type attack, where the viciousness, aggressive and hatredness of these people is spilling out onto the streets, and they're just going and having a pop at the next nearest Jewish or Israeli person they can find. Unfortunately, it's putting everybody in a difficult position, because sometimes in this game of war, innocent people do get taken down. People who are not affiliated to either the military or the government or religion or politics, who just want to have their ordinary life. Unfortunately, in this reality, that does happen. But there is a positive, proactive case of bias against Israel by mainstream media. particularly heralded up by British and American media outlets, mainly British media outlets and European media outlets, but American media outlets also have that, whereby they tend to look at what goes on, and when they find a case of an Israeli conducting himself inappropriately towards the Palestinians, the Arabs, that makes big headline news. And yes, sometimes that does happen. But if you look at every single country, in every single country you'll find that's exactly what goes on. But this is a case where the majority of the people, the majority of the Palestinians, the Arab people living in the West Bank, are wanting to bay for Israeli blood. Okay, this is an activity and a proactive approach by them to try to break the resolve of Israel. Now, there is only one word I can come to think of as to why they would want to be doing it, and the word is jealousy. Somehow they have a land that they haven't been able to cultivate and develop. I know full well that if I had a parcel of land and I wanted to develop it and cultivate it and plant my vegetables and become self-sufficient on that land, I would sink all my energy in doing that. I wouldn't be spending my time blaming my neighbour for the fact that I haven't got the right tools, or the right wherewithal, or the right training, or the right incentive, or the right imagination, or the right gift. We all have to accept our own responsibility for the world in which we live. Okay? We all have to say, I can't blame somebody else for that. That's my responsibility. I messed up. Mea culpa, as the Latin goes. Okay? And the problem is with the Palestinians is that they are unfortunately blaming Israel for everything. Everything that goes on. And it's not just the Palestinians. I've noticed this goes on with countries throughout the Middle East. But right now, to get back to the critical position of what's happening in Israel, what's going on in Israel right now is really critical. I think that every time I watch the news now, particularly if I watch I-24 or Haaretz or JN1, I'm hearing reports of people who are being of Jewish kids, Jewish families, a husband and wife shot in front of their children while they were in a car parked by the side of the road. And this is what's happening. And right now, this is not being reported by mainstream media. It is not. There are some people who would like to think that there is this Zionist conspiracy behind a whole lot of things. Well, you want to live in La La Land? Go ahead and live in La La Land. Okay, that's that one. Now, the next article on the news is, this one comes from Reuters. Okay. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit about one of my favourite American entrepreneurs. I used to follow this man and I like watching his show. This one here, I'm going to read it. The article is from the Reuters, and the headline of the article is Obama does not think Trump will end up being president. Oh, poor Donald Trump. What do we say about Donald Trump? I think Donald Trump is the greatest showman America has ever known. Okay, he somehow manages to break the ice with regards to with regards to endearing the nation. I don't know how he manages to do it. Here's I've highlighted this section here. It says he is a great publicity seeking. He is a great publicity seeking, and at the time when the Republican Party hasn't really figured out what it's for, as opposing what it's against, Obama said of Trump during an interview on CBS 60 Minutes program airing on Sunday night. Opinion polls put Trump at the front of a crowded Republican field. Let's talk about Donald Trump a bit. I like him. I like Donald Trump. I don't know why. I'm sure he's just as much a broken and fallen human being as the rest of us. He just happens to be worth an awful lot more. But it's the way he goes about it. He was very respectful in the first season of his show called The Apprentice, and he tried to make sure that when he was dismissing people when he said you're fired, that he wasn't vulgar about it. Now I know, but they tried to bring that show over into England using Alan Sugar, and I think Alan Sugar comes across as being somewhat rather gruff. He doesn't have the charisma I would say that Donald Trump is very charismatic, very charismatic. But having said that, he's also very much into a power sort of trip. But the question is, will he make a president? Will he make it as president? Well, the $64 million problem with making it as president is that it's all fine and square having a saber to rattle and a placard to hold up in front of the camera when you're running for office. When you get in, it's a different thing altogether. Now, there's an expression I picked up somewhere. I'll see if I can try to remember where I got it. Okay, you do not need to remind me. That's right. One of my favourite films, The Russia House, with Sean Connery, Michelle Pfeiffer, and I think it's Mario Barra. And that one of the statements in there when Sean Connery talking to the Marius Barra, Bosie Barley Blair is talking to Dante about lies and deception. Dante says to him, "You don't need to remind me that man is not equal to his rhetoric," and that is so true. And this is so true about people who want to get in power. Their rhetoric may take them to power, but can they honour their rhetoric and hold it up when it comes to the actions? And generally speaking, this is always the case. People who want to aim for power, people want to get in power, and when they get in power, they suddenly realise it's not exactly what they thought it was. So I wonder if Donald Trump's going to be able to do that. I wonder. Who knows? Perhaps. But according to this, so Obama reckons that Trump's not does not think that Trump will end up being president. Well, apparently Hillary Clinton has thrown her hand into the ring as well, and it seems to me that what we've got going on in America with the Truther movement, the Tea Party, the Republicans and the Democrats. You have, instead of a 2-ring or 3-ring, you've actually got a 4-ring circus going on right there, and that's really interesting. And you should see some of the shock jocks out there, like Alex Jones, talking about what's going on there. Well, I don't agree with half of what Alex Jones says, but he does make for great entertaining, and it's always good to light blue, touch paper and steering wheel back and put the cat amongst the pigeons and see who reacts to what is being said. By the way, Alex Jones is... one of my other favourites in America is that rather outspoken woman, Ann Coulter. I don't agree with anything she says, but she's an awful lot of fun to watch going into action. Okay, so that's that one. Now coming to a slightly more serious note. Moscow has summoned, this is from The Guardian today, Moscow has summoned UK attaché over claims of RAF licensed license to down Russian jets while Russian jets are flying over Syria. Now this is also another one that's really dangerous. You see, do you see a pattern emerging here? Did you see a pattern emerging here? This is really something that's quite dangerous. We have Russia throwing their hat into the ring with regards to what's going on in Syria. Britain is doing all kinds of stuff with its jets. Turkey, right on the borders, has got its problems. I don't know what's happening with Lebanon. It used to be that way back in the 80s, the early 80s, when journos used to be real journos, and you used to get them going out there, you call them Middle Eastern war correspondents. One of my favourite films, Witness in a War Zone with Christopher Walken, you should watch that. That really is a kind of similar. It's a Hollywood version of how it works there. It used to be like that. But now it's becoming very dark and sinister, and actually I would like to share with you my take and my understanding of the significance of 9/11 with regards to this. Before 9/11 ever took place, it could be argued that mankind could more or less deal with the regular day-to-day humdrum of corruption and the regular day-to-day humdrum of localized war. America might decide to go to war against one nation and then come back, and then we'll have a period of peace. Well, generally speaking, that's what normally used to happen. After World War II, the Americans went to war in Korea, and after Korea, Vietnam, and then came back, and then he had a little period of lacking in hostilities, but then suddenly things started hotting up, and of course there's these localized events happening, and Middle Eastern terrorists are kicking off, and Baader off, and Red Brigade, Red Cell, and Fifth Column actions, and world terrorist groups are all starting to have a pop, and that's people are trying to put out fires in all kinds of places. We could possibly have more or less lived with such a show like that, but right now, after 9/11, I think that the world has become an increasingly cynical world now. It has become more volatile. The stakes are much higher with regards to politics. The stakes are much higher with regards to military. The stakes are much higher with regards to economy. And let us understand, okay? Let us understand, we were led, I think it was 1991 when the Berlin Wall went down. We were led to believe that the Russian Empire had come to an end, okay? That's what we were led to believe. The Russian Empire had come to an end, and now we could all make up friends, and we could all be pallies and slap each other on the back and go off and find ourselves a nice little villa, a nice little chateau, and quaff some champagne and some red wine and some caviar, and have a talk about the old Cold War days, like we were swapping war stories, and then get on with our normal life, okay? But 9/11 changed that, and 9/11 changed it not necessarily for the good. Unfortunately, what is happening today and what is going on today is that the price of human liberty, the price of freedom, the price of peace is exacting a heavy toll, because as more and more people are vying for less and less resources, the control grid is getting tighter and tighter, and unfortunately, oh my goodness, it is quite nasty out there actually. But here we have Moscow now is decided that it's going to summon the UK attaché over claims that RAF licensed down Russian jets. I don't know whether that's actually going to happen. I do not know whether the British military jets are going to actually engage in hostile fire with Russian jets. It would be inherently dangerous, I believe, for Britain or any other to engage in that kind of action with an adversary the size of Russia. It's one thing to engage in localized nuisance and to deal with localized nuisance in other places, but I'm here to share with you, doing it against an adversary the size of Russia is not a good way to proceed forward with this one. It is not. But the article says here, and it's kind of an interesting article, British Embassy in Moscow confirmed that the defence attaché has been asked to clarify the UK's position and to advise and had visited the Russian Ministry of Defence in Moscow on Sunday. According to British government sources, Russia accepts the explanation. Does she? You know, in war is a bit like a polecat. No, war is a bit like a mongoose looking at a rattlesnake. Who's going to outwit who? Let's have a look at how war works in the ordinary sense. I have a knife. My neighbour has a knife. He wants to use it on me. I want to use mine on his. He goes out and gets himself a bigger knife. I go and get myself a bigger knife. He gets himself a gun. I get myself a gun. He gets a bigger gun. I get a bigger gun. I go and get a cannon. He gets a missile. Suddenly we're escalating the rhetoric to violence to the nth degree. Now, when Russia says she accepts, the relationship feels to me like a mongoose and a rattlesnake. It's like they're squaring each other off. I hope that the powers that be exercise wisdom and diligence and due diligence with regards to this one, and don't make a foolish mistake. We already have a very dangerous and very bad and volatile situation in the Middle East right now as we speak, with what's happening with Israel, with what's happening in Syria. We don't want to push it any further. Okay, that's an article there. Now we're coming up to the next one, and this one is Iranian American journalist convicted. Convicted, Iran news agency says. Now here's another one. Dubai, Washington, Reuters. This is another one from Reuters 19 hours ago. A court in Iran has convicted Washington Post reporter Jason Razian. Iran's ISNA news agency said on Sunday, but the US newspaper said Tehran was working a political angle by not disclosing details. ISNA quoted judiciary spokesman, excuse my pronunciation of this one, Gholam Hussein Mohseni as saying the Californian-born Razian, the paper's Tehran bureau chief, had 20 days to appeal the verdict. Razian was arrested in July 2014 and was accused of espionage. Now it's interesting that when you get some journalist, it's interesting that when you're a journo abroad, especially if you're a journo abroad reporting outspoken news bureau stories, it's interesting that what happens is, especially when you're involved in war conflicts, you tend to have the eye of the nation in which you're working as a journo in looking at you to see if you're an espionage agent or not. I think there's an interesting tack on this one. I think it's also interesting because, don't forget, remember that there's been this deal between Washington and Iran, and people are still asking the question, has Washington okayed Iran's military program? Where do you begin with that one? Where do you get me started on that one? That could be a real can of worms. There are people who claim, erroneously or rightly claim that that Iran's already got nuclear capability. There are those who claim that Iran's seeking nuclear capability. There are those who say that Iran's nuclear aspirations are only purely commercial, with regards to creating nuclear plants to power up their plants. When you're dealing with nuclear, you only have one word to say. The application of nuclear is always, inevitably, with any country who gets their grubby little, sweaty little, palmy little mitts on that stuff, inevitably always turns military. Unfortunately, applications are limited. For a vehicle of gaining one country's self-esteem, it's got a lot going for it. It's got a lot going for it. If a country wants to gain its self-esteem, all it has to do is claim to be a nuclear state. But if a country wants to have machinations on another country's demise, then it's a different case altogether. And it is well documented. And yet again, we're talking about Middle Eastern affairs here. It is well documented that the leader of Iran at the time, Ahmadinejad, has expressly declared the annihilation of Israel as being part of his mandate. Okay, so I want you to remember that when anything goes on in Iran, particularly when Iran is claiming that an American journalist has been arrested under espionage charges, it might be that Iran is flexing its muscles, or it might be true that he's a spy. Well, we don't know, but it's possible. Now I've got another article. Now this is going to lead me on to the main feature of the show, and I hope you enjoy this one. I'm going to be talking about one of my favourite intellectual journalists. Okay, this man has influenced quite a lot of how I see the world, and the reason why is because of his writings. He has written, I think, arguably 15 books, most of them based on the same subject. And I'm going to get into him right now. Okay. This is an article that was printed by the independent global news outlet called Democracy Now! And it's actually quite a late article, but it's been republished and resubmitted yesterday, and hasn't been updated yet. But I'm bringing it forward because it was I posted it from my app, because my app actually can do that. And it's from Democracy Now! And it's Noam Chomsky, the United States, not Iran, poses a great threat to world peace. Now, Noam Chomsky, in a speech Saturday at the New School in New York, Noam Chomsky explained why he believed the US poses a great threat to world peace. The United States is a rogue state, indifferent to international laws and conventions, entitled to resort to violence at will. Take, for example, the Clinton Doctrine, namely, the United States is free to resort to unilateral use of military power, even for such purposes as to ensure the uninhibited access to the key markets, energy supplies and strategic resources, let alone the security or alleged humanitarian concerns. And adherence to this doctrine is very well confirmed and practiced, as need hardly be discussed amongst the people willing to look at the facts of current history. I'm going to explain the reason why Noam Chomsky is one of my favourite literary writers. Noam Chomsky has been at the business of writing from the perspective of the media, the military. Remember, I was telling you earlier on in the broadcast I was going to bring up the issue of the media and the military working hand in hand. Noam Chomsky has documented this fact. I don't document this fact. In fact, this fact has been documented, and well documented at that, but has not been also broadcast and shown by mainstream media, specifically in the news. I mean specifically in the news. They may have had documentaries about Noam Chomsky, and one of them went out on Channel 4 some years ago, way back in the late 90s, and it's the one that formed my understanding of who Noam Chomsky. In fact, when I watched the documentary, I actually felt that I had to watch that documentary 3 or 4 times and then go out and get some Noam Chomsky items, Noam Chomsky books. I'm going to show you a couple of Noam Chomsky books and items. Okay? Number 1 item, and it's a very interesting book. I've got a couple of books here to share with you with regards to Noam Chomsky. Now, the first book, in fact, it was the one that opened my eyes to how the world worked with regards to the media and the military. The first one is called Manufacturing Consent. Now, I wonder if you can see that. That's called Manufacturing Consent. Manufacturing Consent. The premise of Manufacturing Consent is the idea. It's an argument that you would ask a person a question, and say, for instance, in a social scenario. You'd be in a situation where you'd want to ask a person, do you really want war? Does anybody want war? Do you want war? Would you be willing to go to war? No. Would you be willing to pick up a gun and go for training and go to war? I think the only kind of people I know that would be willing to go to war are people who are either jingoistic, patriotic, rightly or wrongly, or people who have a slight screw loose. Are the only people I know who would want to go to war, who would want to pick up a gun. Some people, unfortunately, choose to go to war, particularly people who enter into the army at the very low levels, because they're trying to escape a world outside of the military where there are very little or scant opportunities for them in the professional arena. But generally speaking, most people outside of that little cluster of groups of people that exist, most people wouldn't want to go to war. Now, Manufacturing Consent is a very interesting title. because when you read and understand manufacturing consent as a linguistic dialect, as a linguistic tool, it's actually essentially a mechanism. It's a tool that's used for a specific end. Okay, now nobody wants to go to war, but the conditions have to be manufactured by the military and the media, whereby we, the public, give our consent to go to war. Now that means you've got to frighten somebody. Now that means you've got to scare somebody. Now I'm going to get into some interesting things about Noam Chomsky and connect them with some other things that are going on. When you want to scare somebody into doing something in order to manipulate them into doing something, okay, that is a way of manufacturing the condition whereby you're trying to get that person to give their consent, to give their power to you. Now, that is called brainwashing or perception management. Another name for it, of course, is a psyop. And the military and the media have managed to work together in some way in order to manufacture the condition whereby we have given our consent. And you just have to go out and see. Let's say, for instance, a good example, going to the ball games. Now, I said that my TV station, this one here, is essentially a sport-free zone, and it is. It's a sport-free zone. I do not want to have sport on here at all. But I'm going to use sport as an example. Okay? How many times have you watched American shows or listened to Americans talking about their politics, and they always inevitably end up using sport vernacular? Let's get into the ballpark and steal the ball. Oh, the best offense, the best defense is the best offense. Well, they're talking sporting language. Well, they would have picked that up because most people who go to sporting events, okay, are actually being indoctrinated into the group dynamic in a way that they are being indoctrinated into tribalism. And it's appealing to the tribal, natural urges of the human condition, not the intellectual position of the human condition. Okay? So what we have is we do have a situation in which, broadly speaking, Noam Chomsky is describing manufacturing consent. In other words, the media and the military scare people in a way to make them feel that the bogeyman is knocking at the door, to make people feel that that the lunatic is at the door, that the madman's in the forest, and that the werewolves are on the streets. Anybody but anybody who will see that and doesn't know quite how it works, what they will do is that they will say, well, I need to be protected from that. So how am I going to get protected from that? Well, the best way to be protected from that is to use this condition. When you succumb to this condition, is to ask your politician, your job is to protect me. Now, this is where the politicians come in. They say, well, okay, we'll protect you. We'll protect you. How do you want us to protect you? Do you want us to protect you by throwing sticks and stones or words? Use harsh language, if you like. No, I need something a bit more than that. Well, here's the issue, that when you ask your politician to protect you against a bogeyman who's roaming the streets, your politician then decides he's going to conduct himself in a fair with regards to the media and the military, then you might find yourself asking yourself the question, how is it that we're going to war? Well, you didn't quite ask the politician, you asked him to protect you, but you didn't ask him how he's going to protect you. So Noam Chomsky has written a whole lot about this. One of them is, of course, manufacturing consent. The other one I've got, and I've only got 2 of his books, unfortunately, because I've been reading an awful lot of other stuff, is it's called The Fateful Triangle. Okay, I'll show you the title for that. And it is to do with the United States, Israeli and Palestinian relationship. I don't know whether you noticed this, but there is a very strange dichotomatic relationship between the US Palestine, and Israel. On one hand, you'll have the President of the United States having a chat with the Israeli Premier of the day, whichever President and whichever Premier of whatever period of human history since the rebirth of the nation state of Israel in 1948, will say to the Israeli Premier, you know, you need to do peace with the Palestinians. But then, of course, obviously, the Palestinians won't do peace with the Israelis for obvious reasons, because they're sworn enemies of Israel, specifically because they desire the destruction of Israel. But then the American Premier will then go to the leader of the Palestinian people and say, well, look here, you need to do peace with Israel. And then Israel's got to defend itself against what the Palestinians are doing. Meanwhile, what's actually happening here is that you have the American President or Premier is actually working both sides of the street, because he's using body politic to drive the agenda, not actual peace. Do you understand that? He's using body politic to drive the agenda, not actual peace. There's economy at play, there's money at play, there's trade agreements to be upheld, there's trade import and export licenses to be agreed and upheld upon, and of course, obviously, there's the issue of resources, particularly Middle Eastern resources. Now, Noam Chomsky's been a real critic of this, and he has actually been a critic of a lot of what America has been involved in. Now, his work goes right back to the late 50s, I believe, and he started cutting his teeth on looking at how the American foreign policy happened and went about with regards to the Vietnam War. Okay. And he realized that the Americans, at a time in the Vietnam War when they started to realize they were losing the war, upped the ante by making sure that they had to do certain strange things with the media to keep the people interested in that war. And one of the philosophies behind the Vietnam War was called the domino theory. The idea that America wanted to deal with Reds, and it was obviously reeling with the backlash of the Korean War, and the Korean War was set juxtaposition the McCarthyite Reds under the bed scare. So this really scared the public. It really scared the people a great deal. And this was happening at a time, at a great exciting time in America, where you had the civil rights and people waking up and wanting peace, the hippie movement, and the counterculture. And this was a time when mankind could have possibly, at a time, snatched a real opportunity for human development out of the fire that made the 60s. My estimation, unfortunately, it failed. And it failed for several reasons. And there are those people who, for want of a better expression, who were involved in that kind of work, involved in that kind of world. And what they did is that they actually decided that they were going to steer the process down the wrong road. They felt that war was much more beneficial than peace. They were going to disregard the peace claims or the peace cries from Haight Ashby and from Laurel Canyon, from the guys who wanted to speak to the beatnik groups that were coming out of Timothy Leary's group, to the outpouring of the 60s movement, which was and anybody who lived through the 60s movement. I was only born in 61. I got to remember the 60s movement through my parents and through friends who lived through that as adults, as teenagers. I got to live. In fact, I kind of think that I've been living vicariously of other people's history, so that's kind of interesting. But there was a great opportunity, but it was lost, and the opportunity was lost primarily, yet again, because of an event that took place that shook the entire world. And it goes back to the JFK assassination. Unfortunately, the Jack Kennedy assassination, it was the bulwark. I believe it's the benchmark by which you judge all modern events of that ilk, that era, and that type. But Noam Chomsky, he started life off as essentially a professor of linguistics. And he was studying how linguistics and how language is used to steer, to change, to form, and to fashion, and to essentially to engender our emotions in a way that's fundamental. And it was because he was studying that he realized that the US government knew through different ways that they could use words to stir up certain emotions, which would then outpour itself in the human actions, which then ultimately as a force could be used to be steered in a particular direction, or either that way or this way, with regards to any foreign or domestic policy. Now, Noam Chomsky, he's not alone in actually seeing how this is working out. Okay, but he was I think he was the godfather of the I would call him the modern godfather of the modern conspiracy theory world, because although he claims not to be a conspiracy theorist, and he just takes life and what he finds from the news and the media and from the press releases from the government and from what is reported by periodicals and political journals that have been released at the time, he claims not to be a conspiracy theorist, but he reads from the stuff and he reads between the lines, and somehow he manages to connect the dots in a way that makes sense in a world that actually doesn't make sense. If you're a Bible believer, you will actually be able to say, yo, you can make sense of the world, and that's true, you can. But if you don't believe in the Bible, you don't have a Bible believing sense, or you're not into any kind of religion in any kind of sense, you won't really be able to make sense of the world, because your viewpoint is underpinned by another belief system which is erroneous in many ways. So you won't be able to make sense of that one. But what Noam Chomsky does is he looks at these journals, he looks at the periodicals, he studies, and he sees a pattern emerging between what is said on the Hill. And when I mean the Hill, for those people who, when I will use American colloquialisms where necessary, and for those who are not American in the audience, when I say on the Hill, for those on the Hill is Capitol Hill. It's the expression that's used in most American films where they say the Hill, they're talking about Capitol Hill. They're talking about the legislature, the judiciary, the Parliament of America. For those on the Hill who want to steer the American people down a particular direction, and that direction is a direction that is counterproductive to the ordinary people, but is highly lucrative for the military and the media. Now, the media get an awful lot of money for this because they get paid by selling their stories, in some cases their toilet rags, their lies, peddling their lies essentially, to the ordinary public, so that the public can then acquiesce their wishes to the politicians. I've heard it said in America, and I don't know what it's like in England, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but I've heard it said in America that that people have tried to prove that there is actually a law that states that American citizens have to pay taxes. As far as I know, from the documentaries that I've read, from the documentaries I've seen via the different documentary channels that I go to, there's not just YouTube. And by the way, YouTube, you can use YouTube quite intelligently if you know what you're doing with it. But there's the Top Deck documentaries, and there's a couple of other documentary sites which are equally valid and have very good documentaries, particularly with regards to political philosophy, politics, military, media, and they all seem to say the same sort of thing, that there is this campaign essentially to steer people using the media. And because the military gain an awful lot, and because there's no law, because they haven't found a law, I'd like to see if anybody can show me an actual book, open it up, scan the page and say, there you are, in the page, on the book, there's the statute, there's the law in the United States that's enshrined on constitutional law, whereby it's required American by law pay their taxes. I mean, a couple of documentaries which haven't actually laid that out yet, but this all ties back into the notion that the military and the media work together to essentially to purchase the and bond people's souls over to their version of events in order to get them to give their assent to war. And that's what manufacturing consent is all about. Now, Noam Chomsky, he was producing most of his material from the late 50s, I'd say, to 60s and 70s. He was very popular in the 70s during the Vietnam War. And in the 70s, there was, I don't know whether it exists now. I've been trying to look for it on the internet. There used to be a peculiar catalogue that came under the banner of banned books, and it was the Amok. Okay, and the Amok banned books list would have Noam Chomsky as one of the list of authors that that it had. And of course, Noam Chomsky is not the only one who's written up about such events. One of the other ones of my favourite, and this is another one who's a leading thinker, is, and it's kind of tied in because I'm sure that this guy would agree with a lot of what Noam Chomsky has to say. And there's this guy called Alvin Toffler, the third wave. Now, Alvin Toffler takes Noam Chomsky's work to a slightly different level, similar sort of direction, but a slightly different level. Alvin Toffler describes three-wave warfare. The first wave is, you normally call it the pre-industrial wave warfare, tribal warfare, massive amounts of people, massive amounts of weaponry on a bloody field where people are slaughtering the living daylights. Then you have what's called the industrial wave warfare, where you have, in this case, not just massive amounts of people, massive amounts of weaponry, but you also have mass production of weaponry. And the industrial wave warfare was very much the warfare of World War I and World War II. And that held us pretty much instead with regards to the pattern of warfare right up until about 9/11. Because the third wave warfare is a different warfare. It is a warfare which, unfortunately, is a warfare that would spew out into a few other erroneous areas. This third wave warfare is now called the information wave warfare. This is the first time that information is used as a weapon now, more than the traditional forms of warfare. You have the Clausewitzian form of warfare, you have the Nechayev compartmentalization form of warfare within terrorism. But here, for the first time, we're seeing information used as a weapon to shape people, and they started practicing that during the Vietnam War. That's what PSYOPs were all about. That's what black propaganda was about. That's what manufacturing consent was all about. And it is with regards to the concept of manufacturing consent that Alvin Toffler then takes Noam Chomsky's work and develops it even further. And to develop it in a way that actually helps us to understand why it is we are making classic mistakes now. And we are making mistakes, and the mistake that are being made here right now are mistakes that are to do with the fact that we're lazy with how we remember how news works. There are some people who are able to read a news item, for instance, and remember that news item, and then at a later stage, 6 months, a year, 2 years down, see something happen in the news again and say, hang on, haven't we been here before? Well, the answer is yes, we have. Because mankind who forgets history is preempt to repeat history, the lessons of history, whether they be good or bad. And unfortunately, we are in a position where we are repeating history again. Now, it's been claimed that there are what you call false flags. The one that they say that sparked off or helped bring about the Vietnam War was the Tonkin Bay event. You should go and check up false flags. There's compelling evidence. And I mean really compelling evidence that a lot of what's been going on of late has been one after another of a catalogue of false flags. Yet again, why? Because false flags are a form of PSYOP, And that's exactly what Noam Chomsky was describing in his book Manufacturing Consent. The idea that the state is going to manufacture the condition whereby we give our consent. Now, I don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to state false flags exist. I just have to read one of the leading intellectuals of the United States of America, a professor of linguistics who has done incalculable amount of work to demonstrate how the media and the military work hand in hand to create our perception for us, and in doing so manufacture the condition whereby we give our consent. Okay, so we don't have to go to somewhere like Alex Jones to pick up on this. We don't have to go to any place like the Drudge Report or Russia Today or any of these other alternative media outlets. All we need to do is just pick up a book by Noam Chomsky. Go and read Noam Chomsky. Spend some time in his company. Get to know how he thinks. Get to know how he sees the world. The documentary that went with Manufacturing Consent, by the way, lasted about, I think it's about a 2-hour documentary. It was a really long documentary, and it interviewed him as he was presenting his thesis at various conferences in the open forum, and they were interviewing him both before and after he went on stage to discuss his findings and his research. And he said this is something that has been going on for far too long. A person may look at one day and say, well, hang on, how is it that 1 minute I can go into a shop and buy something for X amount of money, and then 6 months down the line I'm buying it and it costs more, and I'm wondering why it is I'm being required to pay this, and that's called that comes under the pretext of inflation. But why is inflation happening? Inflation's happening because somewhere an awful lot of money is being taken and off in a different direction to the direction that we want it, with a view of spending money to create conditions whereby we would be frightened of unnecessarily of a foe. So let me describe how psychological warfare works in a nutshell, and let's try to make it as simple and as easy for anybody to see. I would ask a person, if I was having a conversation in a social environment, how many mines, that is explosive mines, detonation devices, does it take to make a minefield? The answer, if you was to listen to them as they were trying to figure out, oh, maybe it would take 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, my response would be quite simply this: it would take not a single mine to be laid and covered by sand or dirt to make a minefield. All it takes is a barbed wire fence and a sign outside saying minefield. Now, question: if you didn't know any better and you saw a barbed wire fence with a little sign outside saying minefield, are you going to risk having your legs blown up or be killed to prove that that's not a minefield? You see, this is how psychological warfare works. It is the supplantation by certain interested parties in the media to plant ideas, seed ideas in your thinking to make you think there's a threat when there is not. Now, yes, there are legitimate threats out there. Yes, there are. There are legitimate losers, legitimate lunatics, legitimate people who would have you think that they're out to bay for your blood. Of course there are. And of course it's fairly obvious that anybody who did any research would find a whole catalogue of them. But we're not talking about your local loons and your local losers, and unfortunately those people out there who have lost the plot seriously. We're talking about people who somehow have managed to put themselves in a position whereby they can influence and steer other people's actions into acquiescing to a particular foreign policy. Now this is of course obviously what Noam Chomsky was also talking about. Okay, Now, this show I have intended to be broadcast for a 2-hour show, but because I started 15 minutes early, I am actually going to end this show about half an hour, actually 45 minutes early, because actually I think I have said what I needed to say today, and that I have discussed the local news. I hope that you will be tuning in tomorrow, because yet again I will be broadcasting, and hopefully as I get more and more stories and I get used to this, as I said, I'm an amateur at this. I'm a complete amateur. I haven't got any qualifications. I've got no media experience. I'm not trained in any camera work, any lighting. I'm not trained to be a speaker, and I'm just doing this off the fly. I just felt that I needed to say a few things. I needed to share with people the books that I have. As you can see behind me, I have loads of books. Most of them I've read, and most of them I have enjoyed thoroughly, for the purpose of understanding this world in which I live, because this world is a sick world. Now I'm going to quote on my final show here, on my final minutes of the show, and I like the quote that David Icke has. This world is run by unimaginably sick human beings, and the chasm between what we are being told is happening and what is actually happening is enormous. And unfortunately it's frightening out there, and we do need to start looking and seeing exactly what is going on, and be brave and courageous and pick up those books and race to those books. I always say to people, if you would like to go to the voting ballot box, or you would like to vote your politician in, first go and check out some books and in the library, or go and purchase some books first and get to grips with how the world really works first, before you start deciding who you vote for. I'm here to say, well, as I've said, I'm cutting the show short by 45 minutes. I started 15 minutes early, but be here tomorrow. I will start broadcasting at 8 o'clock, and the show will be the same as today. I will put together some news articles and hopefully come up with another interesting appraisal of things that are happening in the world. Good night, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. I'm your host, David C. from IKRRPTV Talk Radio. Good night, and God bless wherever you are.